Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and I have already read 9 books in the first half of December, which is insane, so let's just get started. One of my favorite books of the month is Daughters of the Night Sky by Amy K. Runyon, and this was sent to me by Amazon Publishing, so thank you so much, Amazon Publishing, for sending me this. This was one of my top 3 most anticipated releases of 2018, and it comes out on January 1st, so I will have a full review video up for it for you then. So this is about the Night Witches, who were a flight regiment from Russia, who were all girls, and they flew in the middle of the night and dropped bombs. And that is a topic that I've always wanted to see some historical fiction about. This book had some seriously sad moments, like I'm not kidding, this is a sob fest and a half. It is full of action, it is full of some interesting discussions about sort of women in society and how much harder it is for women to get certain things, how women are undervalued and all kinds of stuff. So in that sense, it is a very feminist book. The only thing that I would criticize about it is just the fact that the last chapter, like, it kind of had this epilogue that randomly takes place a couple of decades later, and it didn't serve the story at all, and that is one of my biggest pet peeves in books as of late, just the fact that, like, a last chapter or an epilogue will be, like, randomly at some point in the future that has nothing to do with what is currently going on in the book. So I thought that was kind of weird, but other than that, I really liked this book, and I highly recommend it. One of my other big favorites of the month was also sent to me by a publisher. This is The Vikings Chosen by Quinn Loftus, and this was sent to me by Clean Teen Publishing, so thank you so much, Clean Teen, for sending me this. This comes out on February 23rd, I think, so I will have a full review video up for it for you then. And this is about a Viking general named Torben and an English princess named Alette who fall in love, and basically, throughout this story, Alette has to marry this king of another kingdom who is a complete douchebag. Like, he is vile. Probably the worst person that a protagonist has to marry that I think I've ever read about, and I've read about some pretty bad ones. Like, seriously, he makes the Sheriff of Nottingham look not that bad from the Robin Hood retelling I read this summer, and that dude freaking slut-shamed his daughter. Like, come on. So this guy is worse than a guy who slut-shamed his daughter. So yeah, he's a really terrible villain. So it was a really good, like, high-stakes story. However, the whole story was like that, and I kind of thought that the story was going to eventually, you know, resolve that conflict about halfway through and go on to, like, some bigger plot points. But this actually is the first in a series, and I didn't know that going into it because it doesn't have a series title on Goodreads or anything. It doesn't have, like, a second book announced on Goodreads or anything like that. So, but basically though, this leaves off on a cliffhanger and everything, and it seems to be going in a direction of resolving that conflict and going on to, like, some bigger storyline. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. I pretty much flew through it, but there is one criticism that I have, I think, and that is just the fact that there's one magic thing that happens, because there is some magic in this book. It's a historical fantasy, and there is one thing that magically happens that does make up a pretty significant portion of the plot, that I just didn't quite buy because it doesn't go with anything else that magically happens in the book. It doesn't match up with the rest of the magic system at all. So I thought that was very weird, and that seems to me like a weak point of this book. I think there could have been something else that happened that could have happened to arrange what happened with that magic instead of having that magic there, because it just didn't add up. But other than that, I really liked the story, and I will talk about it more in a full review. I also completed the Second Sons trilogy, consisting of Lion of Senate, Eye of the Labyrinth, and Lord of the Shadows by Jennifer Fallon, and I ended up really liking this series. The first one was not that great, and I was actually kind of shocked that this was written after the Demon Child trilogy, and you guys know how much I love the Demon Child trilogy, so I definitely thought this was going to be at least on par with that. But the third book was kind of just a 3-star read. Like, it was still pretty good, but honestly it was very generic. The characters had very little personality. It wasn't that exciting. It was just kind of a generic fantasy story, so then I wasn't really expecting much from the second one. But I wasn't even really looking forward to the second and third one, but then I actually ended up loving the second and third books. The political intrigue was so on point, and the characters actually developed so much more personality. And also, what I think is kind of weird is, oddly enough, I would recommend this series to anyone who's a fan of the anime Code Geass. It's one of my favorite animes, and I thought I found some really interesting similarities between this and that show, just because basically both of them have to do with two best friends turned enemies on opposite sides of a conflict, and then basically one of them is a really brilliant dude who knows how to use his freaking brain and like can get out of pretty much anything and comes up with all kinds of elaborate plans of how to achieve certain things and all kinds of stuff. Like, he's literally the same freaking main character as in Code Geass. Like, same personality, same kind of everything. It was super weird. He even paints himself out to be the bad guy, just when it's most convenient, and thinks nothing of the fact that, I totally just betrayed, like, all my friends, whatever. So just like in Code Geass. So it's very, very odd. I think that's really weird. But anyway, I ended up really, really liking this series so much more than I thought I was going to. It's not as good as the Demon Child trilogy or the Wolfblade trilogy, because those are the two series that I've read so far by Jennifer Fallon besides this one, but I really, really liked it still. Next, I read Peter Darling by Austin Chant, and this is a Peter Pan retelling basically about Peter Pan is a trans man who actually returned from Neverland and had to live his life as Wendy, and then returns to Neverland 10 years later and falls in love with Captain Hook. And it is a very interesting story. It's a good, like, dark twist on the fairy tale, and I love dark fairy tale retellings for sure. And I also really like reading about trans main characters because they kind of come with their own unique set of conflicts that you don't find anywhere else. And I really liked this story. It had some very creative aspects to it for sure, but I feel like since the book was so short, we didn't get enough character depth, but other than that, it was great. The next two books I'm going to talk about are books that I am actually really surprised that I wasn't a fan of, because I really wanted to like these books. I thought I was going to love these books, but I did not at all. Really. I actually gave both of them 3 stars just because they did both have some very important things in them that I would like to see more of in books, and that I think could actually help the people who read these books. But I felt the same way about both of them, that there really was not much of a plot throughout the book. Neither of them really got good until the last 20% of the book, and basically up until that point, it was just really boring and completely devoid of plot. The first of those is when Dimple met Rishi. I loved Dimple as a main character. I thought she was great. I loved that it showed a girl going into coding and whatnot, and I really liked this whole discussion of Rishi actually wanting to be an artist, but he has it so ingrained in his brain that he can't do that. So he just doesn't even bother to follow his dreams, to the point where, like, he actually has an opportunity to show his drawings to a famous artist and he still doesn't do it. That could have, if the whole book had been about that, it would have been really awesome. But it actually ended up, that was a very small portion of the plot. And for the most part, this book had no plot. And what plot there was kind of towards the end that involved, like, Rishi's friend and everything, like, that felt very contrived and not developed enough at all. And so I thought the end of this book, like the last 20%, was awesome. But besides that, it just had no plot. The other one that I kind of felt that same way about is Queens of Geek by Jen Wilde. And this, I liked that, of course, I liked that there was a relationship between two women. I liked that there's a queer person of color, and that we get another main character who is autistic and has anxiety, and so there was some really interesting stuff in there. Stuff I like reading about, stuff I didn't know about. I learned some stuff from this book. I thought it was great. But overall, same thing. There was really no plot until pretty much the end, and I just thought that was super boring. And another thing, too, is that this book, I had heard that this is a love letter to nerd culture, but I didn't get that from this book at all. I really just felt like it was boring, and any nerd references in it kind of were just forced, and just because, like, oh, that's right, we need a nerdy reference to emphasize that they're at a convention and that they're nerds. All right, so they just throw a nerd reference in there when it wasn't needed. It doesn't go into, it's not even a clever reference. And then anything that is a nerdy thing that actually takes up a significant portion of the plot was made up for this book, and we get like no background on it at all. None of that worked for me, and I didn't get it. And finally, the last thing that I read, I actually finished it today on audiobook, and that is the first book in the Queens of Renthia trilogy or series or whatever, Queen of Blood by Sarah Beth Durst. And basically this takes place in a world where there are spirits running amok, and the ruler of each kingdom that has a bunch of spirits in it is a queen, and she's the only one who can control the spirits. So girls who show an affinity for controlling spirits and working with spirits are sent to academies to train to become candidates and then heirs, and then one becomes queen, basically whenever the old queen dies. So this was a really interesting book. I did really enjoy reading it. I thought the first half was a little bit rushed, and the pacing was super weird because we go through like a whole decade in just half of the book or less, and that didn't really work for me. I kind of was like losing track of how much time had gone by because it skips over so much stuff. But ultimately, I really did end up enjoying this book, and it's a really clever concept. I like that it's a matriarchy, and I was totally shipping the villain with like this dude. It was so good, and I was kind of heartbroken at one point. Like, yeah, I don't know. So I kind of hope that we get some more introduction to that world as a whole in the second book, because we really didn't get that in this book. It was mostly about this one girl, and so I kind of thought that was a little bit weird and all of that, but ultimately I really did enjoy this book, and I am really excited to read the next one. 5 books plus 2 audiobooks and 2 ebooks is what I read so far in December. I can't wait to see what I read in the second half of December, so let me know if you've read any of these, what your thoughts are, and all of that, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!